Yeah, I think as we speak here today, the images from Gaza keep reaching us in the breaking news. So indeed, it is a topic that is deeply unsettling. Just if you look at the humanitarian situation on the ground. But I would like to start with October 7th, with this unprecedented episode of violence, the attack of Hamas on Israeli civilian population, terrorizing Israeli civilian population, and by doing so, clearly committing large, ultimately war crimes. And I think it's very important to call that out very clearly, particularly also considering the debate here in Austria. In recent weeks and days, we have seen an increase of anti-Semitism in the public sphere here in Austria, and here comes a particular historical responsibility for us to be very attentive and to speak out very, very clearly when such episodes arise. That applies for anywhere in the world, but in particular, we do bear this particular responsibility here, and I think this is important also for our own context here. Now, having said that, what followed this attack was a rather fast decision of the Israeli government. A war cabinet was formed, and a rather fast decision to apply a military strategy that would aim at the destruction of Hamas. This has been mentioned in the introduction. I think if we look at the status quo, this is, of course, a maximum position that makes it so difficult to think about any peace efforts at this point, and yet I would argue it's so important. I will come to that. For a moment, I would like to come back to this initial topic of tonight's discussion, which is on justice and peace. And what I would like to recognize here is that, of course, justice is one of the very central topics if it comes to the Middle East conflict, particularly also from Palestinian perspectives. There is a historic experience of injustice that kicks in depending on the specific Palestinian narrative and experience at different historic dates. Some narratives would go back to the early days of Zionism. The year of 1948, of course, is very central. And then basically this goes on with many rounds of violence and Arab-Israeli wars. 1967 is central, 73 later, where a lot of uprooting has happened for Palestinians, and a lot of fragmentation also of Palestinian society, and ultimately a wish for a Palestinian state, however that would look like. There are broad perspectives on that. I think it's important to not homogenize also when looking at Palestinian perspectives and reducing that to maximum positions of Hamas or also other groups that would call for a destruction of the state of Israel, but also to point out that such a just peace for many parts of Palestinian society could also build on a two-state solution based on the borders of 1967. So justice certainly is a central Palestinian topic. If we look at Israeli discourses about peace, I'm not so certain whether justice is the central topic. My observation would be that security is the predominant topic. So a peace that would guarantee the security of the state of Israel. Now, the issue with these two very dominant narratives, so to speak, and one should be careful when simplifying the positions, but I think in general terms one one can see these two overall topics. We have justice on the one hand as a precondition for peace, and security on the other hand, and both have singular claims for truth, and it's so difficult to reconcile these two positions. Very often they clash violently, or the discourses do not meet at all. And I think in many episodes that we have seen, and in this particularly dramatic episode that we are witnessing right now, this is the precondition. So let's maybe as maybe a final remark for this first part, for a moment just focus on the possibilities that seem on the table. Destruction of Hamas as a maximum aim. I personally felt reminded a lot about rhetorics that we heard out of Israel in 2006 against Hezbollah, when there was very decisive talk about destroying Hezbollah. If we look at Lebanon today, we see that Hezbollah is one of the most decisive forces in the country, and there's basically no way around Hezbollah. And I think this is a relevant historic experience in the region, by far not the only experience in the region, where there was an attempt of regime change, so to speak, and this has failed tremendously. So we have to think about possible scenarios that might follow. So first, I've mentioned I would doubt that on the mid and long term, Hamas could really be defeated sustainably. But even if this was the case, we could imagine a vacuum situation in Gaza, where potentially also jihadist groups could step in, which certainly would not be in the interest of the state of Israel. There is a scenario which is put to the table by Prime Minister Netanyahu. I think there was a statement some 3 days ago about Israel maintaining control of the Gaza Strip. This, of course, would be a maximum position again that would not be acceptable for Palestinians, and where I would have difficulties to imagine how this would play out in the mid and long term. There is a consideration, and this seems to be also a US position, to push for the Palestinian Authority to take over the administration of the Gaza Strip, yet in lack of a political perspective, this is a scenario very difficult to imagine, and the same goes for some form of international presence. One could imagine some peace forces presence, Egyptian, Jordanian forces, for example, playing a certain role. Again, without the political perspective, this will be very difficult, if not impossible, to accept also from a Palestinian perspective. And this leads me to the conclusion for this first part, that it's absolutely necessary to think about possible entry points into, regardless of what the individual positions regarding security and the military operation war in Gaza might be. This differs a lot, but if we see the broader framework, there is an absolute necessity to revive a Middle East peace process comprehensively. The historic experience for Palestinians has been that they have felt left out from negotiations time and again. We have seen that with the Camp David accords between Egypt and Israel back in 77, 78. We have seen that in the 1990s with the normalization of relationships with Jordan. We have seen that in the framework of the Abraham Accords. And now there was even the perspective of Israel perhaps also developing diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia, which again would have been considered a game changer. So a whole bunch of bilateral agreements, so to speak, where the comprehensive agreement has always been left out. And This is certainly the Palestinian experience, where we have heard from the Sudanese example that there is also a worry of overburdening peace agreements. In the Palestinian and Middle Eastern experience, there has been this experience of fragmentation and of leaving out this very core aspect of the Middle East conflict time and again, which has contributed massively to the situation that we are seeing today. And final sentence, that from my perspective also leads us towards a situation where the so-called West is also losing massive credibility in the Middle East and North Africa, but also in contexts of the global South. And I think as we are transitioning into a more fragmented world, this is an issue that has to be taken very, very seriously. I'd like to talk about the humanitarian dimension that we see right now, and then also the political dimension. And this just seems important to me. I would like to point towards the situation in the Gaza Strip as we speak. In preparation for this session today, I watched a couple of videos. I did some proper research on the situation inside the Shifa Hospital, which is the hospital under which allegedly Hamas has developed a tunnel system, and which at the same time is also the site now of massive Israeli attacks. And watching these videos, you see children die because the basic supply to just uphold the machines that would usually contain their lives is just no longer there. And it seems important from my perspective to really refocus on this humanitarian aspect and the devastating humanitarian situation that Palestinian children in particular are facing as we speak, and of course also the civil society as such. Let there be no mistake, there is no justification, and it's a clear violation of international humanitarian law to use civilian facilities as shields. So that in itself is a clear violation of humanitarian law by Hamas. At the same time, there is also under international humanitarian law a strong obligation for all parties to the conflict, and this now particularly also concerns the Israeli side, to minimize civilian casualties. And what we are seeing as we speak is an application of very high degrees of violence, high impact weapons that are dropped on densely populated areas, calls for a hospital to be evacuated seem reasonable and the right thing to do from a humanitarian aspect. At the same time, it's important to acknowledge that the medical system in Gaza is collapsing, and there is nowhere else to go for these Palestinian children. And that is the other side of the equation, so to speak. And I've also researched international reactions also today. Human Rights Watch is is labeling this in public statements as war crimes that need to be investigated. And I think such an observation and positioning from such a source should be taken very seriously by the international community in particular, but of course also all parties to the conflict, and different UN agencies, including, by the way, the Secretary General and the Austrian High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Türk, have clearly pointed out that there have been violations of international humanitarian law by both sides. So it's crucial to see this humanitarian aspect because the costs are particularly high. But I've promised you to also come back to your question. This leads to the political dimension. I think I have mentioned some of these aspects. So if we look at the broader political process, and again, I've said that in my first statement, from my perspective, there is absolutely no way around reviving a comprehensive political process, as difficult as this might seem in the moment, and as many loops one might have in such a process where one has disappointments. That this is something we find in peace processes around the world. It's not a linear progression from war to peace, but it's always processes that are characterized by complexities and many moments of failure and then small successes. It's a back and forth and moving in many directions. So the argument that the moment is just not ripe can always be made. So the moment to start thinking about a comprehensive process is always now. What would need to be on the table? Certainly the issue of Palestinian refugees that live in refugee camps in the region, in Jordan, in Lebanon in particular, but also elsewhere internationally, one of the elephants in the room, so to speak. It is absolutely necessary to talk about the status of the occupied territories, that is the West Bank, that includes East Jerusalem, and very crucially, its points towards the religious dimension necessary to also think about access to holy sites. This concerns particularly the old town of Jerusalem. There have been a number of possibilities on the table, including an international administration of the old town, which, again, for ideological reasons for several parties at this point might be difficult to accept, yet it is necessary perhaps also to creatively think about possible scenarios if it comes to the old town. And if we talk about the West Bank and East Jerusalem, it's necessary also to talk about Israeli settlements, illegal under international law, and also settler violence. And this is perhaps also a dimension that is overlooked broadly these days, as all the international attention goes, of course, to Gaza for good reasons. The violence of Israeli settlers in the West Bank against the Palestinian population is really increasing these days, and the amount of accountability, of course, is tremendously low. So again, here a huge justice issue that absolutely needs to be addressed. If this is not the case, I have talked already about scenarios that are difficult for me to imagine for Gaza in the absence of a political process. I think it's key to also keep in mind the broader regional dimensions of this war. There is high potential for further escalation. Also, as we speak, at this point, limited fights and challenge across the Lebanese-Israeli borders, at this point they are contained. There is a possibility for a larger escalation, particularly if it comes to Hezbollah, and we know that this might very well impact the broader security architecture in the Middle East. Possible stronger Iranian involvement could indeed lead to devastating consequences. So all parties to the conflict, also against this broader regional and ultimately international dimensions, would be very well advised to think about possible ways of de-escalation.